In Kenya's untamed savanna, a lion cub slipped into a raging river, its life hanging by a thread. Just when all hope seemed lost, a dog leapt into the torrent. What followed left rangers stunned and the world speechless, because the lion's reaction was beyond imagination. It was 2018 in Kenya's Masai Mara, one of the most breathtaking landscapes on Earth. The savanna stretched endlessly, painted gold by the rising sun. Birds soared overhead, while the distant roar of the Mara River echoed across the plains, swollen and restless from the season's heavy rains. Near the riverbank, a pride of lions stirred from their slumber. Mothers watched closely over their newborn cubs, guiding them gently through the tall grass. The majestic male reclined beneath the shade of an acacia, his mane glowing like fire under the morning light. For the pride, it was a day like any other, peaceful, safe, and undisturbed. But the calmness carried a fragile edge. The river's muddy waters churned with dangerous force, waiting for a single misstep. Among the cubs exploring the edges of the grass, one would soon wander too close, setting into motion an unforgettable story no one could believe. Among the playful cubs, one small lion ventured farther than the rest. Its tiny paws pressed into the damp soil, nose twitching curiously at the scent of the river. The cub had no idea of the danger that lurked just beyond the grassy edge where the water raged below. The ground beneath it suddenly crumbled, slick with mud from the previous night's storm. With a startled cry, the cub lost its footing and tumbled forward into the churning current. A splash echoed across the plains, and in seconds, the river swallowed the fragile body, dragging it mercilessly downstream. The mother lioness let out a roar that shook the air, racing toward the bank in panic. She stretched her paw desperately, but could not reach. The rest of the pride gathered, pacing frantically, their growls filled with helplessness. None dared leap into the torrent. All they could do was watch in horror as their youngest fought against certain death. Not far from the river, a team of wildlife rangers patrolled the savanna. Walking faithfully at their side was Keto, a black Labrador known for his sharp instincts and unmatched loyalty. His ears perked, his body stiffened. Something was wrong. From the distance, he heard the frantic cries cutting through the roar of the river. Keto froze, nose lifted to the wind. Then, without hesitation, he sprinted across the grass toward the sound. The rangers called after him, startled by his sudden burst of urgency, but he didn't stop. Within moments, they too reached the riverbank, and what they saw made their hearts lurch. A lion cub, thrashing helplessly in the raging current. The lions roared from the edge, desperate yet powerless. The rangers stood frozen, caught between awe and fear. And then, in a moment that defied instinct, Keto made his choice. Muscles taut, eyes blazing with determination, the Labrador leapt straight into the violent waters. The crowd of lions growled in disbelief. The rangers shouted in panic. Against all odds, a dog had plunged into the river to save the life of a predator's cub. The impossible rescue had begun. The river fought Keto with brutal force, waves crashing against his body, but he pressed on. Each stroke cut through the current with determination, his eyes locked on the cub being pulled farther away. For a moment, the tiny head vanished beneath the water, and fear surged through the rangers watching from the shore. Keto pushed harder, muscles straining, heart pounding as the current tried to drag him under. The cub resurfaced briefly, coughing weakly before sinking again. Summoning every ounce of strength, Keto lunged forward and caught the cub by the scruff of its neck, his jaws gentle yet firm, just as a lioness would carry her young. But saving the cub was only half the battle. With the extra weight, the return seemed impossible. Water slammed against them, threatening to pull them both into the depths. Still, Keto fought on, kicking with powerful legs, inch by inch pushing against the torrent. On shore, the lions roared, their voices echoing across the plains. The rangers shouted encouragement, though fear still gripped them. Finally, after a final desperate push, Keto reached the muddy bank. With trembling limbs, he dragged himself onto solid ground, the cub still safe within his jaws. Keto placed the drenched cub gently onto the grass, its small body trembling. But alive, the cub let out a weak cry, coughing up river water as it tried to breathe. From the pride, The mother lioness stepped forward slowly, her powerful frame moving with both fury and fear. The rangers stiffened, hands tightening on their rifles. They knew this was the most dangerous moment of all. The lioness's golden eyes locked onto Keto, her growl low and thunderous. Every muscle in her body rippled with tension and foreign. Instant it seemed certain she would attack the dog who dared to touch her cub. Keto stood his ground, ears pressed back, tail low in submission. Yet he did not retreat. He looked up at the towering lioness with steady eyes, as if he understood her pain. The rangers held their breath as the lioness closed the final distance, until, in a moment that defied instinct, she stopped just short. The lioness lowered her massive head, her breath warm as she sniffed the drenched cub lying at Keto's paws. The little one whimpered softly, pressing weakly against its mother's muzzle. Relief flickered in her golden eyes as she nudged the cub closer, but then her gaze shifted back to Keto. The rangers tensed, ready for the worst. Yet, instead of unleashing her fury, the lioness did something extraordinary. She let out a low rumble, not a roar of rage, but a sound that seemed almost grateful. She stepped back slightly, giving space to both the cub and the dog who had saved it. For the first time, predator and protector stood side by side without hostility. The rest of the pride began to close in, circling around the scene. The towering male watched with steady eyes, his mane glistening in the sunlight. Cubs sniffed curiously at Keto, their tiny paws brushing his wet fur. To the astonishment of the rangers, there was no aggression. Instead, there was silence, a silence heavy with awe. Against every law of the wild, a fragile bond had been forged, and in that moment, the impossible became reality. For the next few hours, the savannah witnessed a scene no one could have imagined. Keto remained near the pride, his wet coat glistening under the midday sun. The lions did not chase him away. Instead, they allowed him to linger close to the cubs he had saved. The rescued cub regained its strength, stumbling on unsteady paws before pawing playfully at Keto's tail. The rangers braced for the mother's wrath, but she did not react. Instead, she watched calmly, her sharp eyes softening with an expression that almost resembled trust. The other cubs soon joined in, circling the Labrador with childlike curiosity. Keto lay patiently, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm as he allowed the cubs to climb over him. Their small roars and playful swipes filled the air, blending with the distant call of birds. The rangers, cameras in hand, whispered in disbelief. They weren't just watching lions and a dog. They were witnessing a miracle, a fleeting glimpse of harmony in the wild. As the sun began to sink, painting the sky in shades of amber, the lions finally retreated into the tall grass. Their cubs, padded closely beside them, safe and playful once more. Keto returned to the ranger's side, his fur still damp, his body exhausted but his spirit unbroken. The rangers exchanged stunned looks. They knew they had witnessed something the world would scarcely believe. Their cameras had captured every moment, proof of a miracle that blurred the lines between predator and protector. That night, the story spread beyond the Mara, reaching villages, towns, and eventually the world. Locals gave Keto a new name, the Guardian of the Lions. Elders spoke of him with reverence. Children repeated his story in awe, and experts admitted they had never seen such a moment in the wild. What had begun as tragedy had transformed into a legend, one that would inspire millions across the globe.